Okay, Rabotai, we are on page Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph, 27a3, and we are up to the line in the Mishnah that says V'chen b'motarehen, which means, and also with the extra. If you remember, what we talked about was this idea that the money for something that was used for a good thing would be required. Let's say a Bet Knesset, let's say Aron, let's say a Sefer Torah, let's say a wrapping. In all of those cases, the obligation is that a person needs to rise in holiness and not descend. And that was what we were talking about in the last class. But the idea is that we always have to go up. The Gemara's question, the Mishnah was basically predicting what the question would be, where we said that if you sold a Bet Knesset, that you could buy with it something which is holier than a synagogue. What would be a level up from the synagogue? The Aron, the housing for the Torah. But we pointed out, obviously, a synagogue is more expensive than a teva. So if the synagogue is 500,000 and the teva is 50,000, now you have $450,000 change. So what are you doing with that money? So you did what you were asked to do. But what do you do with the extra money, with the leftovers? The Mishnah says, "V'chen b'motarehen." The same halakha applies for the smaller cost of the more holy object. Also applies to all the leftover. So technically, let's say you would want to do it the easiest possible way, even though it might be highly impractical. It would be if you sold the synagogue and you bought 10 arons for the Torah and you distributed them to every synagogue in the town. That would be super easy way to fulfill V'chen b'motarehen. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava taught, Lo shanu ela shemachru ve'otiru. This is talking about when they sold the object, okay, and then ve'otiru, and they had left over. So in that scenario, when they had the leftover money, that would be the case. Aval gavu ve'otiru mutar. However, what happens, let's say, the people of the community raised money for a synagogue. Now they went to buy the synagogue. They have leftover money. I don't know if that has ever happened. The only time that I know of that happening, where a Jewish organization raised too much money, was when the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, guys, Hajjeh Ba'ah, please stop with the donations. You're killing us. There's too much money. We have too much money. Other than that one time in the history of the world, we are not aware of a fundraising campaign that went the same way. But either way, the Gemara over here is describing what might be a theoretical. I say that in jest. I've actually been part of many fundraising campaigns that overshot their goal. Just not for a building, not for a Bet Knesset. I've not been part of. But as an example, my favorite example was we had a Holocaust survivor, Albert Azrak's wife, Aviella's grandfather. He was a Holocaust survivor. He did not put on tefillin since the war. He felt reconnected to his Judaism and he asked for a pair of tefillin. I posted it online. The amount of pairs of tefillin that we could have bought with the money that poured in is probably 15 pairs of tefillin. Because everyone wanted to help. Now I thought I would get 500, 20, 30, 50, 18, and together we'd have one pair of tefillin, a nice pair of tefillin. But in the end, everybody wanted to buy the whole pair. Yishtabach Shemo, the Jewish people are the best. Look how special. Everyone wants to give, they all want to help out. But this has happened numerous times. You have a scenario where someone needs, we can't afford to bury him. We need to raise $2,000, $3,000. People call, they want to help out, and they overgive. So what's the halakha when they overgave for a synagogue? So we just said if you sell a synagogue, the extra money could only be used for something holier. That's when you sold it, used the money to buy the holier object, but had 450,000 change, like we said. What about if we did a fundraiser and we raised $500,000 for a $500,000 shul? We raised $600,000. That's extra money designated for a shul. Would you say that could only be used for something of a higher nature? Rava says, no, that's not the case. Why? Because gavu vehotiru mutar. Et be'abaya, Abaya asks, 1 second, how do you know that? let's look at the Braita. When did we say that motarehen is used for something better? Shelo hitnu, when they did not make a tanai, that if they wanted to use it for toilet paper in the synagogue, or for breakfast in the class, or for bagels, no problem. But aval hitnu, if they made a condition that they're going to use the leftover money that they raise for other things, afilu l'duchsusia mutar, you're allowed to use it even to hire a duchsusia. Now the Gemara is, just give us a second, the Gemara is going to explain what it means, like Rashi says on the word duchsusia, mefaresh lekaman. We're going to explain what it means. We've already had a throwaway comment from the Gemara. What was the Gemara's throwaway comment last time? You could even use it, if all the committee and all the people of the community agree, you could even use it to buy beer, the Gemara said. That was a throwaway fund, that was a throwaway comment, and we mentioned for the beverage fund. And that got us into that interesting discussion over whether the beverage fund is actually a holy thing or not, whether you can take it from Maaser or not, and we explained the difference between it. We got the stamp of approval, so long as you're that kind of a person. We said that, right? Okay. Okay, says the Gemara. So what does the Braita mean that we just set up? And why is this a challenge to what Rava says? What is this case that the Braita says that if they made a condition, then they're allowed to spend it on other things, even a duchsusia, which we don't know yet what it is, but it's clearly not another synagogue / higher level of Kiddusha, right? What does it mean? What's the case? If they sold the Bet Knesset, bought something else, and then had leftovers, ki hitnu mayahavi. Who cares that they made a Tanai? Whether or not they made a Tanai is not relevant. Why? Because this money was already in the form of a shul. I had a comedian that I used to love to follow, very, very sarcastic, right? His name was Stephen Wright. He says, I bought some used paint once. Came in the shape of a house. So the idea of the Bet Knesset over here, I made a condition that whatever's not used for the Bet Knesset, I could do something else. It's not relevant. Because you already put it in the shape of a Bet Knesset. Now you sold the Bet Knesset, you have leftover funds. So your Tanai does not make sense. It wouldn't change anything. This is already the money of the Bet Knesset. Ki hitnu mahavi. What difference would it make? Ela shegavu ve'otiru. So what must be the case? The case of the Braita, where it makes a difference, if you stipulate that if there's extra money on the side, we can use it for something else, is when it has not yet been used for something of a Kiddusha. So what would the case be? Where I raised the money to build the project, but now I have extra. How many times do we have this case, Nathan, in Israel? We raised money for something, by the time we raised the money, got it there, that was already taken care of by someone else. Someone already bought the tzitzit, or bought the helmets, or we have to repurpose the money to something else, okay? So in that case, if I made a condition, I'm going to spend it on something else, halakha is, I'm allowed to spend it on something else. So what do you see? What you see is that Rava said, Gavu vehotiru mutar, if they raised it and there was leftover, it's allowed, and you left it open-ended. But the Braita is telling you, even Gavu vehotiru is with this condition. Do you understand the mechanism? This is a very important moment in your Gemara learning timeline, okay? Very important. We have a Braita. Braita says something is conditional. Okay, we have Rava. Rava says an idea that's unconditional. You know what Abaya does? It's a beautiful Gemara maneuver. What he says is very elegant. What he does is like this. He says there are two possibilities that the Mishnah can be talking about. It can be talking about this, or it can be talking about this. If it's talking about this, it has nothing to do with you, Rava. But if it's talking about this, then that's a problem. So therefore, it must be talking about the case that you're referring to. And if it's talking about the case that you're referring to, and it makes a stipulation, maybe this, maybe that, depends on this, depends on that, you can't give carte blanche in your scenario, because the Mishnah, by dint of the fact that I have forced it to speak about your case, is arguing with you. In Gemara logic, we use this all the time. Let me break it down, because again, this is really important for the future also. Let's say, sorry? Yeah, I'll give you an example. It's so beautiful. It's very elegant. Let's say a guy says, on Sunday mornings, we only have 2 minyanim. Okay. I want 2 minyanim. Now there's another Braita that says, if there's a wedding or a Brit Milah, we have 3 minyanim. We have a Braita that says that. Says the Gemara, okay, is this Mishnah contradicting the original statement? Yes or no? No. Why? Because that Mishnah could be talking about
the extra
any other days other than Sunday. But now comes Abaye, effectively, and he says, yes, but if the Mishnah was talking about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we already have 3 minyanim in the shul. So the Mishnah cannot be talking about Monday through Friday. Therefore, the Mishnah must be talking about Sunday. And if the Mishnah says that on Sunday, if you have a Brit Milah or you have a wedding, we have 3 minyanim, that contradicts what you said, which says that on Sunday, we only have 2 minyanim. What I just did was I constructed an exact replica of the structure of the logic of this question. And this gets used all the time in the Gemara. We have a statement. There's a Mishnah. It doesn't have to be contradicting me, but if I can prove that it can't be dealing in Monday through Thursday, Friday, it has to be on a Sunday, because there are no other options, right? Then what happens? Then you have a question. What will happen a lot of times in the Gemara? The Gemara will say, Tiyuftav Rava. Rava will say, maybe the Mishnah is on Shabbat. Do you understand? They'll find another scenario that the Mishnah could be talking about. And now it's not a question on me. What I just gave you, that is a technique that the Gemara uses all the time. It's establishing whether or not something is a question on one of the Amoraim. Okay, let's come back over here.
Is that technique?
Sorry?
Is there a name for that technique?
I'm sure if you went into a book that teaches you strategies of Gemara or how to learn Gemara, which there are quite a few books that do that teach you the structure of Gemara. Okay? There are quite a few books that do that. I'm sure that he will come up with a name for this. We don't have necessarily a name for this two-step question. A question which starts off as a non-question, but then by dint of the fact that I eliminate the possibility of it not contradicting you, it winds up contradicting you. Okay?
Talmud two-step.
I just imagine now, by the way, all the great rabbis of the Gemara, like Sal saying at the Beit Midrash. Okay, let's go. Says the Gemara, says Abaye, Tama dihitnu. The reason why you're allowed to use something else is because we made a Tanai, a condition. Ha lo hitnu, but if we did not make a condition, lo. And Rava, you said that if it was gavu ve'itnu, you could use it regardless, whether or not they made a stipulation. So the Mishnah is disagreeing with you, Rava. The Gemara says, no, leolam shemachru ve'otiru. Exactly what I said to you would happen. The Gemara says, no, let me find you another scenario which the Mishnah could be talking about, in which case it's not Sunday, or in our case, in which case it's not gavu ve'hotiru, where they raised the money and had extra money. Rather, what's the case? The case is machru ve'hotiru. They sold the Beit Knesset and they had extra money after they bought the Aron Kodesh. This is how we understand the Braita when the Braita says if you made a condition. Because why did we say it's not going in that case? Because who cares, condition, shmendishin? It was already used. It's already in the shape of a Beit Knesset. So when you want to take it and use it for something else, it has to be Ma'alim B'Kodesh, has to go up in Kiddusha. When did we say this Mishnah that you have that the Mishnah's idea of going up, Shelo etnu shiv'at tovei ha'ir b'ma'amad anshe ha'ir, that the committee did not make the condition when they sold it in front of the people. Aval hitnu shiv'at tovei ha'ir b'ma'amad anshe ha'ir. But if they made a condition when they sold it with the people that they're going to use the extra for everything else, afila diduchsusia nami mutar. You're even able to use it to hire a duchsusia. Yes, the Gemara, could you finally tell me what a duchsusia actually is? The Gemara says, Abaya said to this rabbi who was arranging the Braitot in front of Rav Sheshet, Mi shmiya lach mi Rav Shesha, my duchsusia. I know it means something that's not holy, but what does the actual term mean? Amaleh, Rav Sheshet used to say, Parasha de mata. Duchsusia, what is that? That's the person who would go around and deliver the mail in the city. He carries the mail from this one to that one in a town. Now, I just want to hit pause for 1 second. This is so deliciously ironic. I don't know if anyone will figure out why. Because there's another word that we don't know what it means. Where is it? In the Megillah. We learned about this in Masechet Megillah. The Gemara says that it asks the question, what if you have Megillah, Mikra Megillah versus Talmud Torah? Ask the Gemara, what do you mean Megillah versus Talmud Torah? Megillah is Torah. The Gemara says, no, what we're talking about is that when you read Megillah, there's at least one word that you don't know the answer, what it means. Et ha'achashdar peneh. Remember that over there? Yes. So it mentions these couriers, and it tells us about, by the Achdar Peneh, they're riding on these types of animals that were swift-legged creatures. But we don't know exactly which creature it means. Meaning that when you're reading the Megillah, there's a word that you don't know what it means.
Similar.
Ironically, here we have another word that we don't know what it means. And what is it referring to? A courier. Again, a courier. So it seems like we really dropped the ball on the courier services in the time of the Gemara. Okay, let's continue. So is everyone clear? So what did the Mishnah just do to sidestep the question? The Gemara. The Gemara said, no, we're referring to a case of Shivat Tovei Ha'ir. We're referring to a case of Machru V'hitnu, of Machru V'hotiru, where they sold it and they had extra. How could they buy something that's not of a high level? We go back to our answer that we said before, that when the community all agrees with the committee that they're going to sell the synagogue, in such a case, since we have a complete agreement of everybody, again, highly technical and probably theoretical, that all the Jews in town and the committee agreed on something, but if they did all agree on it, as we explained back then, we know that they're not going to go back to the shul, and since they're not going to go back to the shul, then those funds are released for general use of the community. Says the Gemara.
Can I squeeze in, what if the sale is lower sale, but the price is higher? In other words, you sold it to a church, which has happened many times, right? It's going down in terms of the building. I get the building is not the synagogue anymore. But what if it's sold to a lower level, but you're taking the funds to a higher?
It's a very good question. That's not to be dealt with over here.
Okay.
But it's a very good question. When we've been talking about, can I tell you why? We've been talking about lower Kedusha. We have not been referring to cases where it's the opposite of Kedusha, where it's idol worship or, let's even go a pagan temple, where it's for sure idol worship. We've not been talking about that. We've only talked about, now you want to use it for a gym. You want to use it for a restaurant. You want to use it for a bathhouse. Would you be able to do that or not, right? So we've talked about secular uses and degrading uses. We've not talked about negative uses. Okay? So we'll still get to that. Okay. Says the Gemara. Amar Abaye says, Hilkach haitzur bam rabanan. Let's say you have a budding Torah scholar, young rabbi. Dishama le milta v'lo yada pirusha. He hears a word and he doesn't know what it means. L'shayle kameh d'shchiach kameh rabanan. Let him ask someone who always hangs out with the rabbis. Because if you spend enough time with great men, you'll learn what these terms mean, because the great men are constantly involved in the language of the Talmud, of the Halakha. So if you don't know what it means and you don't have access to a great tzaddik, great Talmid Chacham, ask the shamosh, ask the gabai of the great rabbi, and the gabai will be able to let you know what that means. Just like in this case, he asked the guy who was arranging the Braitot in front of Rav Sheshet, couldn't get to Rav Sheshet, but he already was able to say, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet explained that Duchsusia means Parashat de Mata, the guy who rides around and he brings messages from the people to the kingdom or vice versa. Says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Bnei ha'ir shalchu li'ir acheret. Let's say you have people, that live in Deal. Halchu li'ir acheret. They went to another city. They went to Long Branch. Upasku aleim tzedakah. Okay? Now that they're in Long Branch, the people in Long Branch said to them, listen, everyone in Long Branch is giving a certain amount of charity tax. So you have to give this amount of money to the poor people of the city, to the upkeep of the city, etc., etc. Pasku aleim tzedakah. Notnim. They have to give, they should give that amount. We'll see exactly what that means and when that means. Ukishen bain, mevi'in otayim ahem. And when they come home, okay, mevi'in otayim ahem, they take their money back. Umefanasim ba aniyei Iran. They use the money for the poor of their own town. So effectively what the Gemara is saying is like this. You moved from Deal to Long Branch in the short term. Right now, you're a resident of Long Branch. Right? Because you moved here for a short time. You might be going back, but right now you're a resident here. Which means that your tzedakah tax dollars, okay, need to be given here to the people here. Because these are the poor of your city. So we're going to give it there. Now you're ready to go. You can go back to the community chest and say, listen, I'm now going back to Deal, where my responsibility is that my money, the money I gave, should be used for the poor people of Deal. Because now I'm moving back. The halacha is, Rabbi Yochanan says, and Rabbi Meir, that you would take your money back, and now that money would go for the poor people of Deal. Obviously, we're talking about a scenario where that money still exists.
And you can't go down in Kodesh, in Kedusha, with the money you're taking from one town to the other.
I don't know that that's true. Let me tell you why. We've talked about this idea a couple of times, that there's a difference between Tashmishe Kedusha and Tashmishe Mitzvah. What's with Tashmishe Mitzvah after it's been used for a mitzvah? It no longer has holiness, as we explained, right? No longer has holiness. So here, the money is not holy, the money is charity. So it's holy in as much as it's used for charity. But if the money is sitting, waiting to be distributed for charity, it's fungible money, not just fungible in terms of being able to access it or move it to another place, but also fungible in the terms of its kedusha. But the Mishnah over here is saying, once it was pledged and given to poor people, it needs to be given to poor people. That I don't think is a law of holiness. It's a law of ownership. Okay?
It belongs to the poor.
It belongs to the poor at large. And this idea is very, very interesting concept. The idea that it belongs to the poor at large. We have this idea also in the most sophisticated Gemara, one of the most difficult Gemaras in Shas, is a Gemara called Takfa Kohen. A case where there's money that's supposed to go to a Kohen. The Kohen comes to your backyard and he steals the object that you have to give to the Kohen.
A different Kohen steals.
A Kohen steals an object from a Yisrael that is supposed to be given to the Kohanim. What's the halacha?
Does the guy have a designated Kohen, or he hasn't yet?
That is the whole back and forth of it.
There is a king.
I'm supposed to be able to decide which Kohen I want to give it to.
There is a king.
One second, you took it from me. What have you deprived me of?
Choice.
You've deprived me of the choice of that Kohen. So the question the Gemara is wondering about is, do we say you have to give it back to me because you had no right to take it? It's my matanat kohanim to give, or do we say no? This money doesn't belong to you. It belongs to kohanim. What do you have in this thing that belongs to me, not to you? You have the value of the joy, of the pleasure, of the honor of being able to say, I'm giving it to this Kohen. That has a monetary value. The value of how much is it worth, that feeling, that I could give it. So the Gemara is trying to ascertain, do we say that the whole thing goes back because you were not allowed to take that? Or do we say you never had ownership on everything in this but for that little amount of hana'ah? So do I only pay you tovat hana'ah? Okay? That is the question that the Gemara is asking in the scenario of Takva Kohen. It is, again, one of the most complicated sugyot in Shas. Okay? But what am I bringing from there? I'm bringing this idea that the Gemara is wrestling with, is that this belongs to Shevet Kohanim. In other words, there's an ownership by a group of people, and that's what the Gemara is struggling with. Do we say that there's this quasi, ownership of a large amount of people that then is designated? You get to choose which of those people goes to? Do we say that it already belongs to them and I have that choice? Or do we say, no, it doesn't belong to any of them. It's just a responsibility to give to someone in that member tribe. So until I've done that, it's wholly mine, not H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-Y, in which case you stole something and you have to give it back. Maybe you stole the extra L in the W-H-O-L-L-Y. Okay, let's carry on.
With the case of the aniyim and the money, let's say there is money left over, right? In the collective Long Branch aniyim fund. But if you gave $100, do you get to take 100? Do you get to take a portion thereof because some money was
At least thus far, it says notnim, meaning they give the whole tax. And then it says mivi'i nota, that they bring it, which means that they take the whole thing. So at least for now, we're talking about that you get to take out what you put in. Okay?
Take his question one step further. You were in Long Branch for 3 months. It's an annual tax. Can he take 3/4 back, but they get to keep 1/4 because you were there for the summer?
Excellent question. But thus far, the Gemara is only saying give, get. Okay? What that question really depends on is how we look at this tax, right? Because if it's a tax that you're paying because you live there, so the time that you're staying there would be a relevant factor. If it's a tax that we give because everybody in this community needs to be involved in helping poor people, so as long as I was here, I had an obligation not to be involved. Now I have no obligation. This was my obligation. It's there. Let me take it and then fulfill my obligation in another place. Yes, Jonah.
Do we have pasku that taxing today of charity? Is that like an obligation? Does that occur? Or just when someone collects, we're giving tzedakah, not technically a tax?
No, we do not have this now, although we most definitely should. I say this all the time. There's a big question about school fees. And we're in this terrible situation where people can't afford the school fees. And they came up with a simple solution which would allow for everyone to be able to afford school fees in the community to send their kids to a yeshiva. Everyone. What would it require? It would require altering the way we paid tuition. That's what SIFA was trying to do, right? What was the problem? The problem was that you need buy-in. In the olden days, they didn't need buy-in. They levied the tax, and now you have to pay it. And if you don't pay it, if you don't pay it, Beit Din had means at its disposal. We don't yet know what the means were of at the disposal of the Beit Din, because we have not yet learned Masechet Makot. But when we learn Masechet Makot, we'll learn exactly what they were able to do to ensure that things that the Beit Din said had to happen would happen. But again, these are problems. And the crazy thing about this problem is that actually we have a solution. And it will wind up that over the lifetime of a person, you won't pay more than you're already paying. That's the crazy part, But either way, we don't have that option now. So you're asking me if we had that option? Yes. Can I give another example of why I think we absolutely should have this? And it's not only a crime, but a tragedy that we don't. You have in every community people that are raising money from the community. There's a finite amount of money that community members will give to anything. And you have 4 organizations who are doing the same thing. Why? Because the ego at the head of this organization is not willing to work with the ego at the head of this organization. So because these 2 people can't figure this out, we have to give 2 times to this tzedakah. And by the way, if you think it's in one area, think again. It's in practically every area of tzedakah. Now, in Israel, this is happening now like in the most rampant way. But in Israel, it's excusable. You know why? Because we're at war. We don't have time to have meetings. We have a request come in. We have to deal with the request. We'll figure it all out when everybody is safe and sound at home and our soldiers are back, with their families. Okay, Hazaku Baruch. But when it's not like that, when it's in a community, and this one wants to do, again, I don't want to say any words, because any word that I say will already be an indictment of somebody. but without saying words. Everybody here knows what I'm talking about. Not specific charity. It's many different. Where charity is, this plus this plus this, and then one of the things that they do, someone else decides to do for whatever reason. Now you're in a situation where two people are raising money for the same thing, and not only is it theoretical that they'll deal with the need as it arises, because at least then the money is going to the same place, not being wasted. It's just distributed by different organizations. But there are other cases, again, I hesitate to say it because I don't want to stop any of the great work that's happening. But I'm going to make up an example. Just going to make up an example that never existed before. Imagine somebody the guy had 3 eyes. He needed to have surgery to remove the 3rd eye, because if not, he would lose sight in 2 of his eyes. Comes along 2 organizations, and they say, we booked you a hospital room, and we paid for the hospital room for you to have your surgery, Hazak Baruch, because we're so kind. Now, there's 2 rooms. He's only going to use one of them. This organization does not exist. The need does not exist. So you can't tell me I said something about anybody. I said nothing about anybody. But 2 organizations now booked this hospital room. They already paid for it. So $10,000 and a surgery that's not going to be used was now burned because these 2 organizations couldn't figure out how to work together. And that $10,000 could have been used for something else. A lot of times, the waste is not, the actual waste happens. It's not just that they didn't work together so they could have worked better. It's that they spent the money on something that then doesn't get used, that then gets thrown in the garbage. Okay.
Ego, or it's just...
Lots of different things. Ego, greed, power. I don't want to listen to him. I don't like the rules that they're doing, so I'm going to build my own organization. But again, the net for the community was not worth what you did. You built a whole other infrastructure with a whole other office, with a whole other staff in order to do what? Okay, let's carry on. Says the Gemara, Tanya Nami Hachi. We learned also a Braita that is similar to this concept that we just explained. The people of a town that go to another city, and they told them, this is what you have to give. Notnim. Now remember, that is an assessment. Pasku alehem. They said that we assess you, this is what you need to give. In Panama, Chacham Tzion Levi, when the rabbi would come, Chacham Tzion Levi would say to this guy, you're giving 26,000. You're giving 18,000.
They also had a community tax, basically.
They had a basic community tax, but you also had someone saying, I know what you have. And he did. Most cases are not like that. But I'm saying when that is the case, that was how, when they allowed someone to raise money for something, that was how they did it. Okay? When they come home, so first they give it, then they take it back. But what happens if you have a single person that went to another town? In that case, the money should be given to the town that he moved to. So the question is, wait a minute, what are we saying now different than the first Amar Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan said earlier, B'nei Ha'ir. A whole town moved from one town to another town. How could that be possible? How does one town move to another town? You know what the answer is? Israel. Right now, you have whole towns that are not living in their own town. On the northern border, and the southern border. This is a reality happening right now, the Gemara we're learning about. The Braita is talking about when it's not B'nei Ha'ir, it's Yachid. One person goes to another town. What's the halakha? He gives his money, but when he leaves, what happens? They distribute that money to the people of the city. Let's try and understand, first of all, why is there a difference between Rabbi Yochanan and the Braita? When the people of the city went, they have to take the money back with them. Because from where will they get the money for their poor when they move back into their town? When the Yachid goes, we could allow for the Yachid's money, the single individual's money, to stay in the town that he was in. It's not a problem. Because the money will come for the people, the poor people of the town that he came from, will come from the rest of the people who already live in that town. Okay?
They need it from the individual if that's the case.
Sorry?
So why do they need it from the individual?
So no, the answer is we don't take it from the individual. So that's why the Braita is different than Rabbi Yochanan. When the individual goes to another town and then goes back, the money that he gave for the poor in that town stays in that town.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
In like Long Branch.
So it stays in Long Branch. Okay. Why? Because now when they move back to Deal, when he moves back to Deal already has a kuppah for the poor people from everybody else. But if everybody moved to Deal, yeah, but you lived in Long Branch. We assessed you while you were here.
You went back to Deal.
He did go back to Deal. He doesn't get to take the money back with him.
But again, that's my whole point. If Long Branch has the money for the poor,
yeah,
right, and he's only in Long Branch for like a few months or less than a month, and he goes back to Deal.
You just said the keywords, less than a month. There's an amount of time after which...
We didn't specify what
we didn't specify. There's an amount of time that after you're there, there's an amount of time, after you're there for a certain amount of time, we can assess you with this tax. You're now someone who lives here.
Sure.
If you move back, you move back. I don't know if you're going to move back, but right now you live here. I assess you with the tax. Why should you get to take your money? You lived here. The poor needed you. You had an obligation. We took the money from you. Why should we give it back to you? Because you're moving somewhere else.
Depends on the time.
But when the Bnei Ha'ir move back, no, remember, it doesn't depend on the time. What depends on the time is how long do you have to live before we assess you with that tax. Yeah. Once we've assessed you with that tax, you owe that money to the poor. Now you've given that money to the poor. You made a personal decision now that you want to leave the town. What does that have to do with us and our assessment of you for the fact that you were considered a domicile of this town? By the way, a lot of times the laws of tzedakah are very similar to tax law. So I moved somewhere. I spent enough time to be considered a New York resident. What's New York going to tell me? You owe us taxes. No, what do you mean? But I'm moving back to Wyoming. I don't care. You lived here long enough for us to tax you for the time that you were here. So there's a minimal amount of time where I have to pass a threshold for them to obligate me on the tax. Once they obligated me on the tax, I owe them that money. That money goes to whatever the city decides it goes for. I don't get to take that money with me when I go back to Wyoming, okay? However, what if all of Wyoming moved to New York? That's the question.
According to the tax law?
Yeah.
If it's more than 6 months, they have to pay the New York tax.
Absolutely. Except for the fact, what if they were making all that money in Wyoming, okay? They were making the money, they just weren't living in Wyoming. So the money was needed for Wyoming. Wyoming would make an argument to New York State and say, we need that money for our state infrastructure. And we understand that you want to charge them for the fact they lived by you, but the needs of these people, in order to make that money, was required right now. Of course, New York State, as New York State does, would take the money from them because that's what we do. Okay.
Rabbi,
and when they would ask us if they could have the money back, we would say, forget about it. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
If the threshold exists on a single person, whatever that time we didn't get to yet, if it's a month, like Manny said, but when this person moves back to the original location, let's say Deal, is he then taxed again?
Yes, he is taxed again. Yes, he is taxed again. The question is he taxed in the same time frame? And the answer would be no. He's not taxed for the same time frame. He'd be taxed. Exactly. He would need to establish his domicile status back in the new place, and once he's there. But remember this, you're thinking, it's not fair, I have less money. That's going to be part of the assessment. If you don't have, because I already gave it over there, so New York State Deal is now not going to charge you for it because it's an assessment based on what you have. If that money is out of pocket somewhere else, so they're going to take...
Sounds like Bernie Sanders.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, with less anti-Semitism. Let's move on. Rav Huna Gazar Ta'anita. Rav Huna decreed, he instituted a Ta'anit on his area. Okay, so we already understand this halakha from when we learned about it in Masechet Ta'anit, that there are times when the decision will be made that...
Really? He's on fire today.
Yeah. 2 for 2.
That will decide when... will decide when and where there's a good enough reason for everybody to have to fast and pray. So when we've made that decision, Rav Huna has decided, he made a ta'anit on the community. Ligabe Rav Chana bar Chanilai. Rav Chana bar Chanilai came, v'chol b'nei mata. They came, all of them, they joined, the people of his town came to join Rav Huna in his town's fast. Okay? Is that clear?
No. People from. I'm
Rabbi
sorry.
Chanana's town king.
Rav Huna made a ta'anit. Okay? Who came? The people of Rechana and Rechanilai, they came to the town of Rav Huna to participate in Rav Huna's fast. Ramu alayu tzedakah. The people of Rav Huna's city, what did they do? They see all these guys there. They're like, brilliant. You came to fast with us? You gotta pay the tax with us. V'yahavu. They gave. They gave their dues. V'yahavu. Kibau lemeti. Now it was time to go back home. Amru le. They said to the people of that town, Notva lanmar v'nezol. Okay, give us back our charity money. V'nefanez ba aniyeh matin. We're gonna use the money for the aniyim in our city, exactly like we learned before in the statement of Rabbi Yohanan that when a town goes, Bnei Ha'ir. Amar lahu, he said, Tanina, we learned the Brayta Medvarim Amurim. When do we say that you give it back to them? B'she'en sham haver ir. When you don't have a Torah scholar, Talmid Chacham. Chaver always means Talmid Chacham. Okay? When you don't have a Talmid Chacham there, Aval yesh chaver ir. But if you have a Torah scholar that's there, Tinaten lechaver ir. You should give it to the Talmid Chacham, and he'll distribute it the way he feels. Chol sheken da'aniyeh didi v'didchu alai smichi. And that is definitely the case, because over here, in this case, Rav Huna's town and Rav Chana's town both relied on Rav Huna's charity to be able to live. So one more time. In a scenario where the Bnei Ha'ir, the deal people came to Long Branch, okay? And in Long Branch, who lives in Long Branch? Rabbi Ozeri. Rabbi Ozeri gives tzedakah out in the whole world, okay? So the halacha is, now the Long Branch, the deal people who move to Long Branch say, okay, we're going back to deal, give us back our tzedakah money. Rabbi Ozeri says, that's only when there's no Talmid Chacham. When you don't know that the person who's distributing it is going to distribute it properly according to the halacha where it should go. But here that you have someone like Rav Huna who's in charge of that money, and you know that he'll do with the money the right thing, you don't have to take your money back, and you don't get to demand your money back. And then the Gemara adds one extra stipulation. And how much more so that the money went to Rav Huna or Rabbi Ozeri, who gives not only to poor people from Long Branch, but everybody from Deal also comes to him. So your poor people and my poor people are our poor people. There's no reason, therefore, for you to take the money back, and there the halacha would be that it stays. Now, again, I want to just be clear. There's one difference here in the nature of this tax. Tax in the case of New York State is regardless. Has nothing to do with need. The government over here decides how much money you have to pay. Let's say, as an example, all the roads are paved. All the few police officers who are crazy enough to sign up to be part of NYPD are paid. Firefighters, paid. Everyone's paid. The city has no reason to collect this tax for any of the reasons that are good reasons. What will New York City do with that money? If you think you're getting a check back in the mail, you obviously need to sign up for mental health care services. And of course, we will pay for it. We'll pay for it. They're not giving the money back. They're going to give it to some indigenous art student to create a statue in the middle of Central Park made out of toilet paper. That's what will happen with the money. That's what will happen with the money.
It's in the works. Yeah.
They're going to find some stupid reason to spend the money on something that services no one. That's what will happen. That's not the case here. We're not talking about a tax where that money disappears into some hole, where someone some city official will rub the back of some other city official that helped him get elected, and the money will be spent on some, pork bill, like we call it. That's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about the tzedakah of the tax here, which is done al pi halacha, all the needs of the city are going to be taken care of by this fund of the city. If the city has no more needs, they don't collect the tax. Is this clear? Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about the idea where the Gemara is saying everybody's got to pay this money, and Deal hits you, and Long Branch hits you, and they hit you. What we're hitting you for is because someone has no food, and it is the community's responsibility to help someone who doesn't have, to give them. One clear thing I want to say. There is no obligation in the Torah to forever help someone. There is no obligation in the Torah to just let someone stay on the dole forever. Zero obligation. There's no obligation for us to pay for someone to stay in an unemployed state. Zero.
Even if they're mentally sick?
If they're mentally sick, then they belong in a mental hospital. Then you're not paying for unemployment. You're paying for mental health care. You understand?
There is a small thing if I give someone tzedakah in the street and I do it more than 3 times, or food, that I'm supposed to have to give it.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not sure what you mean. But in a scenario where someone is not helping themselves, there's no obligation for me to eternally create what we call a welfare state. There's no obligation. And the Talmid Chacham, who's in charge of the money, will make that decision. Whether or not the tzedakah we're giving this person is helping them or is harming them. There are programs that are operational in this city, in this state, in this country that are not helping people. They're ruining people. They're allowing people, they're perpetuating a state of helplessness, a state of, et cetera, so a dependency. And actually, if someone were to spend that money, it would be much better spent, instead of giving it to people, in helping them get employment. I'll never forget our resident Eliyahu Meir Weiss, who refused to take $1 from anyone. He said, I don't want your money. Help me get this job. I want this job. The one time I finally convinced him to take money, you guys remember this? I finally one time managed. I was like, I said, please, you don't have, take this. What did he say? Okay. I was like, oh, Baruch Hashem. He said, now it's mine? I said, yeah. He says, I would like to participate in the mitzvah of helping people with tzedakah. And he gave me the money back. He only wanted the money so he could fulfill the mitzvah of giving tzedakah. He says, I'm trained. I've done something. Help me get a job. I don't want anything but that. And that's why it's important for there to be someone in charge of this tax who actually is not trying to get reelected, who's not a political pundit, who's not about honor or ego. It's about doing the right thing. Be'ezat Hashem, we should be zocheh to do the right thing and to perpetuate doing the right thing. Baruch Hanai Le'olam.